The stream should be setting up now. Going live. HermitCraft Season 10 Frankenstein reading stream for Thursday, the 15th day of the month of May in 2025. Yay. Okay. Let's see if we are actually live. Let's achieve some sort of confirmation that we're broadcasting on this here station. It looks like we might be live. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do all of the things I would normally do during the setup stream music, which we can't do today because this is going to be a VOD, which you probably already know if you're watching this in the future. I've been brainstorming funny little differences between presentation styles for the Juppet and the Beetlejuice for the curatorial thing. And one of the things I wanted to do was have the Juppet be very forward-looking, while the Beetlejuice is very backward-looking. And so I actually came up with this little thing that I just posted to Blue Sky. This is the sort of forward-looking speculation that I think you should expect to see from the Juppet. Prediction. Within 200 years, a teenager will be bored on an interstellar journey, while their dad explains that the initial discoverers of the semiglutides at the heart of the modern ozone space engine spent decades just jabbing them into people's stomachs. I mean, that would bore my kid. I'm over here like, man, did you know how much they used to just electrify people? Well, I'm playing Stardew Valley. Okay. Have fun. When they first discovered the Stardew plant. Okay. Let's see. Welcome, Maria the Demon. Welcome, Padawan. Welcome, Freya, Book Fanatic, Iconic Anemone, Page Mel, Redbin Kittens, Simply Lost, NB Andy. Glad to see y'all. Let me make sure I got the correct Discord open as well. Welcome, Centauratron, who says a surprise Frankenstream. It was on the streaming schedule as such. For joehills.net/soon. Oh, Naman Sabu says Jimmy's YouTube stream kept going down today too. Oh no. You know, that actually makes me worry that maybe there were some issues. I'm thinking about this with... Okay, no. It looks like we're okay. With the internet ISP flickers, we don't want this episode or this VOD getting jammed into like 8 different VODs because of the internet cutting out. So hopefully it's okay. So anyway, I've got the What We're Reading link, which is Chapter 8 of Frankenstein. So for those of you who missed the last episode of this, you can always go back if you're on the VOD and recatch the old ones. There is a Frankenstein playlist on my channel at youtube.com/joehillstsd. But your pal Vicky F has just returned from school to find out, well, I mean, he left school because he found out his younger brother was murdered. He was going to go back anyway. But when he got back there, the night before he got back home, he saw the monster out spider climbing up a cliff face and near the site where his brother was murdered. And he's like, uh-oh. I know who the murderer is. It was the monster. And meanwhile, everybody's like, no, the murderer is this young woman who came to help us out around the house a while back, who we really like. But she must have been the murderer because we found this chain the kid had in her pocket. And so now Vicky F is about to go to this poor girl's trial. And I guess we're going to find out if he thinks it's a good idea to tell judges that a monster that he made has just murdered his brother. Because, you know, that can only go well. But, you know, he's a well-meaning, smart young man. And I'm sure that nothing untoward will happen at any point in this story. So, while we do that, we've got this thing, which isn't entirely functioning. Let me see if I can remember how this works. So it's something like I hold down both of these buttons. Yeah, that generally seems to be functioning as intended. Great. So that'll work. And while we do that, we might want to turn down the volume just a little bit on the block sounds and stuff. There we go. So I think we are now ready to read Chapter 8 of Frankenstein. I can set this up to work with the foot pedals, but the thing is, I'll still have to Alt-Tab out. Oh, wait, no, I don't have to Alt-Tab out to use the scroll wheel to scroll. Oh, okay. Never mind, we're setting this up properly with the foot pedals. Controls, keybinds, jump, unbind. Done. No, wait, we're going to unbind some other things. We're going to do some other stuff. Where's the mouse buttons? Daniel J. McGrail, oh no. Well, yeah, hopefully this will help you relax. Okay, so use item, place block is middle. Okay, so now when we go back to game here. Woo, foot pedals. So, other stuff we need to do before we start reading. Just as a reminder, viewers will be thanked for tips at logical breaks in the chapters. If you would like to tip, tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. We are currently 15 away from the next face camera expansion milestone. And I'm tracking those tips on paper because we haven't had a chance to go buy a new abacus yet. Okay. So, here we go. Without further ado, I think that's French for yada, yada, yada. We are now going to read Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, Chapter 8. And let's see if we can make this work with the foot pedal. We passed a few sad hours until 11 o'clock, when the trial was to commence. My father and the rest of the family, being obliged to attend as witnesses, I accompanied them to the court. During the whole of this wretched mockery of justice, I suffered living torture. It was to be decided whether the result of my curiosity and lawless devices would cause the death of two of my fellow beings. One, a smiling babe, full of innocence and joy. The other, far more dreadfully murdered, with every aggravation of infamy that could make the murder memorable in horror. Justine also was a girl of merit, and possessed qualities which promised to render her life happy. Now all was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave, and I, the cause. 1,000 times rather would I have confessed myself guilty of the crime ascribed to Justine, but I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered as the ravings of a madman, and would not have exculpated her who suffered through me. The appearance of Justine was calm. She dressed in mourning, and her countenance, always engaging, was rendered by the solemnity of her feelings exquisitely beautiful. Yet she appeared confident in innocence, and did not tremble, although gazed on and execrated by thousands, for all the kindness which her beauty might otherwise have excited was obliterated in the minds of the spectators by the imagination of the enormity she was supposed to have committed. She was tranquil, yet her tranquility was evidently constrained, and as her confusion had before been adduced as a proof of her guilt, she worked up her mind to an appearance of courage. When she entered the court, she threw her eyes round it and quickly discovered where we were seated. A tear seemed to dim her eye when she saw us, but she quickly recovered herself, and a look of sorrowful affection seemed to attest her utter guiltlessness. The trial began, and after the advocate against her had stated the charge, several witnesses were called. Several strange facts combined against her, which might have staggered anyone who had not such proof of her innocence as I had. She had been out the whole of the night on which the murder had been committed, and toward morning had been perceived by a market woman not far from the spot where the body of the murdered child had been afterwards found. The woman asked her what she did there, but she looked very strangely, and only returned a confused and unintelligible answer. She returned to the house about 8 o'clock, and when one inquired where she had passed the night, she replied that she had been looking for the child, and demanded earnestly if anything had been heard concerning him. When shown the body, she fell into violent hysterics, and kept her bed for several days. The picture was then produced, which the servant had found in her pocket, and when Elizabeth, in a faltering voice, proved that it was the same which, an hour before the child had been missed, she had placed around his neck, a murmur of horror and indignation filled the court. Justine was called on for her defense. As the trial had proceeded, her countenance had altered. Surprise, horror, and misery. Okay, I'm realizing that not having space bound, or not having jump bound here, means that I can't actually go use the bed. Hold on. Whoops. Hold on. How do I I'm trying to use the bed. Thanks, Scar. Okay, so we can't have space bound to that and the other thing at the same time. We're learning this. Okay. It's fine. It's fine. We're making it work, people. Okay. What are we using the concrete for? Construction material. Justine was called on for her defense. As the trial had proceeded, her countenance had altered. Surprise, horror, and misery were strongly expressed. Sometimes she struggled with her tears, but when she was desired to plead, she collected her powers and spoke in an audible, although variable voice. God knows, she said, how entirely I am innocent, but I do not pretend that my protestation should acquit me. I rest my innocence on a plain and simple explanation of the facts which have been adduced against me, and I hope the character I have always borne will incline my judges to a favorable interpretation where any circumstance appears doubtful You're suspicious. She then related that by the permission of Elizabeth, she had passed the evening of the night on which the murder had been committed at the house of an aunt at Chennai, a village situated at about a league from Geneva. On her return, at about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked her if she had seen anything of the child who was lost. She was alarmed by this account and passed several hours in looking for him, when the gates of Geneva were shut, and she was forced to remain several hours of the night in a barn belonging to a cottage, being unwilling to call up the inhabitants, to whom she was well known. Most of the night she spent here watching. Toward morning, she believed that she slept for a few minutes. Some steps disturbed her, and she awoke. It was dawn, and she quitted her asylum, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. If she had gone near the spot where his body lay, it was without her knowledge. That she had been bewildered when questioned by the market woman was not surprising, since she had passed a sleepless night, and the fate of poor William was yet uncertain. Concerning the picture, she could give no account. I know, continued the unhappy victim, how heavily and fatally this one circumstance weighs against me, but I have no power of explaining it, and when I have expressed my utter ignorance, I am left only to conjecture concerning the probabilities by which it might have been placed in my pocket. But here, also, I am checked. I believe that I have no enemy on earth, and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the murderer place it there? I know of no opportunity afforded him for doing so, or if I had, why should he have stolen the jewel to part with it again so soon? I commit my cause to the justice of my judges. Yet, I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examined concerning my chamber, and if their testimony shall not overweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned, although I would pledge my salvation on my innocence. Several witnesses were called who had known her for many years, and they spoke well of her. But fear and hatred of the crime to which they supposed her guilty rendered them timorous and unwilling to come forward. Elizabeth saw even this last resource, her excellent dispositions and irreproachable conduct, about to fail the accused, when, although violently agitated, she desired permission to address the court. I am the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered, or rather his sister, for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since and even long before his birth. It may therefore be judged indecent in me to come forward on this occasion, but when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry. Wait. This is now Elizabeth talking. Sorry, not Justine. I'm doing the same voice. That was confusing and incorrect. I'm just so focused on making this concrete. I'm misreading my cues. Okay. Sorry. Elizabeth, for those of you just joining us, is Victor Frankenstein's adopted cousin and somewhat sister. Not technically actually his cousin either. They're not, like, blood related, but she was adopted into the family. So they call each other cousins because they're not Actually, brother and sister. And because they're probably... Their mom wants them to get married. It was like her dying wish. So... And they really liked the mom, so... Yeah, they don't call each other brother and sister too much, because that would, like, creep people out. On account of the wedding plans. Woo! Dun, 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 dun. So, anyway. So I need to use my Elizabeth voice. And not my Justine voice for this next bit. I am the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered. Or rather his sister, for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since, and even long before his birth. It may therefore be judged indecent of me to come forward on this occasion. But when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character. I am well acquainted with the accused. I have lived in the same house with her, at one time for 5, and another for 2 years. During all that period, she appeared to me the most amiable and benevolent of human creatures. She nursed Madame Frankenstein, my aunt, in her last illness, with the greatest affection and care, and afterwards attended her own mother during a tedious illness, in a manner that excited the admiration of all who knew her. After which, she again lived in my uncle's house, where she was beloved by all the family. She was warmly attached to the child who is now dead, and acted toward him like a most affectionate mother. For my own part, I do not hesitate to say that, notwithstanding all the evidence produced against her, I believe and rely on her perfect ignorance. She had no temptation for such an action. As to the bauble on which the chief proof rests, if she earnestly desired it, I would have willingly given it to her. So much do I esteem and value her. A murmur of approbation followed Elizabeth's simple and powerful appeal. But it was excited by her generous interference, and not in favor of poor Justine, on whom the public indignation was turned with renewed violence, charging her with the blackest ingratitude. She herself wept as Elizabeth spoke, but she did not answer. My own agitation and anguish was extreme during the whole trial. I believed in her innocence. I knew it. Could the demon who had, I did not for a minute doubt, murdered my brother, also, in his hellish sport, have betrayed the innocent to death and ignominy? I could not sustain the horror of my situation, and when I perceived that the popular voice and the countenance of the judges had already condemned my unhappy victim, I rushed out of the court in agony. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. I passed a night of unmingled wretchedness. In the morning, I went to the court. My lips and throat were parched. I dare not ask the fatal question, but I was known, and the officer guessed the cause for my visit. The ballots had been thrown. They were all black, and Justine was condemned. I cannot pretend to describe what I then felt. I had before experienced sensations of horror. and I have endeavored to bestow upon them adequate expressions. But words cannot convey an idea of the heart-sickening despair that I then endured. The person to whom I addressed myself added that Justine had already confessed her guilt.
That evidence, he observed, was hardly required in so glaring a case, but I'm glad of it. And indeed, none of our judges like to condemn a criminal upon circumstantial evidence, be it ever so decisive.
This was strange and unexpected intelligence. What could it mean? Had my eyes deceived me? And was I really as mad as the whole world would believe me to be if I disclosed the object of my suspicions? I hastened to return home, and Elizabeth eagerly demanded the result. "My cousin," replied I, "it is decided, as you may have expected. All judges had rather that 10 innocent should suffer than one guilty should escape. But she has confessed." This was a dire blow to poor Elizabeth, who had relied with firmness upon Justine's innocence. "Alas! How shall I ever again believe in human goodness? Justine, whom I loved and esteemed as my sister, how could she put on those smiles of innocence only to betray? Her mild eyes seemed incapable of any severity or guile, and yet she has committed a murder?" Soon after we heard that the poor victim had expressed a desire to see my cousin. My father wished her not to go, but said that he left it to her own judgment and feelings to decide. "Yes, I will go, although she is guilty, and you, Victor, shall accompany me. I cannot go alone." The idea of this visit was torture to me, yet I could not refuse. We entered the gloomy prison chamber and beheld Justine sitting on some straw at the further end. Her hands were manacled, and her head rested on her knees. She rose on seeing us enter, and when we were left alone with her, she threw herself at the feet of Elizabeth, weeping bitterly. My cousin wept also. "Oh, Justine, why did you rob me of my last consolation? I relied on your innocence, and although I was then very wretched, I was not so miserable as I am now." "And do you also believe I'm so very, very wicked? Do you join with my enemies to crush me or to condemn me as a murderer?" Her voice was suffocated with sobs. "Rise, my poor girl. Why do you kneel if you're innocent? I am not one of your enemies. I believed you guiltless, notwithstanding every evidence, until I heard that you had yourself declared your guilt. That report, you say, is false, and be assured, pure dear Justine, that nothing can shake my confidence in you for a moment. But your own confession? I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confess that I might obtain absolution, but now that falsehood lies heavier at my heart than all my other sins. Oh, God, I have him forgive me. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor has besieged me. He threatened and menaced until I almost began to think I was the monster he said I was. He threatened excommunication and hailfire in my last moments if I continued obdurate. Dear lady, I had none to support me. All looked on me as a wretch, doomed to ignominy and perdition. What could I do? In an evil hour, I subscribed to a lie, and now only am I truly miserable. She paused, weeping, and then continued. I thought with horror, my sweet lady, that you should believe your Justine, whom your blessed aunt had so highly honored, and whom you loved as a creature capable of a crime which none but the devil himself could have perpetrated. Dear William, dearest blessed child, I soon shall see you again in heaven, where we shall all be happy, and that consoles me, going as I am to suffer ignominy and death. Oh, Justine, forgive me for not having for one moment distrusted you. Why did you confess? But do not mourn, dear girl, do not fear. I will proclaim, I will prove your innocence. I will melt the stony hearts of your enemies by my tears and prayers. You shall not die. No, you, my playfellow, my companion, my sister, perish on the scaffold? No, no. I never could survive so horrible a misfortune. Justine shook her head mournfully. I do not fear to die. That pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me the courage to endure the worst. I leave a sad and bitter world. And if you remember me, and think of me as one unjustly condemned, I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Learn from me, dear lady, to submit in patience to the will of heaven. During this conversation, I had retired to a corner of the prison room, where I could conceal the horrid anguish which possessed me. Despair. Who dared talk of that? The poor victim, who on the morrow was to pass the awful boundary between life and death, felt not, as I did, such deep and bitter agony. I gnashed my teeth and ground them together, uttering a groan that came from my inmost soul. Justine started. When she saw who it was, she approached me and said, Dear sir, you are very kind to visit me. You, I hope, do not believe that I am guilty. I could not answer. No, Justine. He is more convinced of your innocence than I was, for even when he heard that you had confessed, he did not credit it. I truly thank him. In these last moments I feel the sincerest gratitude towards those who think of me with kindness. How sweet is the affection of others to such a wretch as I am. It removes more than half my misfortune, and I feel as if I could die in peace now that my innocence is acknowledged by you, dear lady, and your cousin. Thus the poor sufferer tried to comfort herself and others. She indeed gained the resignation she desired. But I, the true murderer, felt the never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed of no hope or consolation. Elizabeth also wept and was unhappy, but hers also was the misery of innocence, which, like a cloud that passes over the fair moon, for a while hides but cannot tarnish its brightness. Anguish and despair had penetrated into the core of my heart. I bore a hell within me which nothing could extinguish. We stayed several hours with Justine, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth could tear herself away. I wish that I were to die with you. Ugh, I cannot live in this world full of misery. Justine assumed an air of cheerfulness, while she, with difficulty, repressed her bitter tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said in a voice of half-suppressed emotion, "Farewell, sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved and only friend. May heaven in its bounty bless and preserve you. May this be the last misfortune that you shall ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so." And on the morrow, Justine died. Elizabeth's heart-rending eloquence failed to move the judges from their settled conviction in the criminality of the saintly sufferer. My passionate and indignant appeals were lost upon them. And when I received their cold answers and heard the harsh, unfeeling reasoning of these men, my purposed avowal died away on my lips. Thus I might proclaim myself a madman, but not revoke the sentence passed upon my wretched victim. She perished on the scaffold, a murderess. From the tortures of my own heart, I turned to contemplate the deep and voiceless grief of my Elizabeth. This also was my doing, and my father's woe, and the desolation of that late so smiling home. All was the work of my thrice accursed hands. Ye weep, unhappy ones, but these are not your last tears. Again shall you raise the funeral wail, and the sound of your lamentations shall again and again be heard. Frankenstein, your son, your kinsman, your early much-beloved friend, he who would spend each vital drop of blood for your own sakes, who has no thought nor sense of joy, except as it is mirrored also in your dear countenances, who would fill the air with blessings and spend his life in serving you. He bids you weep, to shed countless tears, happy beyond his hopes, if thus inexorable fate be satisfied, and if the destruction pause before the peace of the grave have succeeded to your sad torments. Thus spoke my prophetic soul, as, torn by remorse, horror, and despair, I beheld those I loved spend vain sorrows upon the graves of William and Justine, the first hapless victims to my unhallowed arts. And thus concludes Chapter 8 of Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley. Any thoughts or reflections, questions about that chapter? from anybody out there. I know we don't have our usual Saturday night reading group since we're doing this on Thursday. So if you're unfamiliar with the format, after we complete each chapter, we kind of throw the chat open for anybody who wants to chime in with their thoughts. All right. What we're working on right now is kind of speckling this roof a little bit here. I'm going to see how I feel about this. It's kind of tight up here, which is why I'm thinking that this might end up being another kind of service area type thing. I'm still playing with it. Not sure how we want to do this. Void Challenger says, I just finished reading Frankenstein like 2 months ago in school. Awesome. Well, we're reading it right now here. How am I this evening, says Ghost Thread. I'm doing well. I am trying different tasks during these reading streams to see what is and isn't a good fit. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to texture well while doing this, and I'm honestly still not sure if I am. Because this is not something I have a good muscle memory for, is like scrolling through the hotbar. Like, I feel like I'm actually looking a lot at the game when I need to be looking at the screen, and that's going to cause some issues, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm trying to get a sense of a general texture for this roof here. And it feels like something that has some snow blocks and some other white blocks mixed in. Kind of mottled texture is what I'm going for. I think that should work. Okay. How does Shelley make the effects so tragic and satisfying to read? Probably some application of knowledge of literature and writing at the time. Her parents were both very educated, and so Shelley had access early to a big library, as well as direct influence from her mother's writings as well. I'm assuming she had read at least some of that by this point in her career, which is very early. She was very young when she wrote this. But, okay. Let me just throw in some blocks in here. I don't really have a plan for this texture. I don't normally do too much textures that's not just tetrominoes. Tetromino textures is kind of my go-to thing, where I just throw a bunch of Tetris pieces in there. So I'm trying to do this one slightly more irregularly and see how it turns out, but I don't know if it's going to work. Honestly, it's not... I'm not used to doing it this way, but that's part of where we're trying to get out of our comfort zone. Now, the thing is, though, reading during craft stuff is, like, you know, a big part of this is that I'm generally doing stuff inside my comfort zone during the reading. I didn't expect to run out of concrete powder so soon with that machine. That was really efficient. Welcome, Chisa Chili. Ishan says, I sometimes forget how cruel Victor was in preserving himself. I mean, he's definitely cruel throughout the book. I mean, in this case, though, I do think, especially after she confessed, there really wasn't much he could do. If he had more time, he could have maybe done his own investigation to try and figure out how that necklace had ended up in the house, in her pocket, you know, but, like, he didn't have time to actually gather any real evidence. So the best he could have done would have been to say he saw somebody suspicious lurking around near the site of the murder. But he, you know, if he had said, like, I built a monster and I saw it over where my brother got murdered, like, I think his assessment that he would be perceived as a madman was correct. I don't think that would have helped her. What he needed time to do was to build a real case. You know? If he could be on the cutting edge of natural philosophy, I don't see why he couldn't have applied some, modern police, approaches. I just watched Life on Mars. You know, that John Sim guy did a pretty good job of applying modern police approaches to the 1970s. I don't see why Vicky F couldn't have done it back then. I guess he wasn't a time traveler, but he arguably might have been a madman. Probably not in a coma, though. But I don't know. Core concept. Yeah. Frankenstein doesn't do a lot to help this girl. He's the modern Prometheus, not the modern Policius. He didn't even need to confess to creating a monster, just claim he had an implacable enemy tracking him. I feel like if he claimed that it was a targeted attack because he was being stalked, he would need to prove that. That would have also required. Moon Rosa says, having not tuned into the previous chapters, was the little boy murdered related to Justine? No, Justine lived and worked for the Frankensteins in their house. The boy was Frankenstein's younger brother. Justine was well-beloved family help, who was practically a sister because she had, like, come to them early. Joseph says, I like the voices you used for Justine and Elizabeth. Oh, thank you. Welcome, Salty Pineapple. Oh, let's just knock stuff on the ground. Like professionals. Cool, good job. Okay, just as a reminder, if you're enjoying the stream, we are 15 away from the next face camera expansion milestone. Tips are welcome via paypal.me/Joe Hills and YouTube Super Chat. Endercat says, what would they have done if he was declared a madman? Well, they definitely would have discounted his, what do you call it? His, witness statement. Basically, he's just like, I don't have any way to express that I'm pretty sure this monster I built murdered this girl because I don't have any evidence that I made a monster. Here's the thing, too, is he had no... he jumped right into building this full 8-foot-tall dude. He did not iterate. It's not like he's just like, okay, you see this pet dog I have where I combined like a bunch of other animals? I kind of did that with a person too. He doesn't have like a prototype monster with him that he can whip out and show them as like, here's my proof of concept. You got to believe me, this actually scales up. I made a whole guy, right? Like, he goes out of his way to mention that he hadn't done any prototyping. He just jumped right in to scaling up. Which is bonkers to me. I cannot imagine having figured out how to create life and then just saying, okay, we're not gonna test this at a manageable scale. Like, a manageable scale is something that you can, like, fit in a hamster cage, right? Because when you start making 8-foot guys wandering around without doing the early test stuff, there might be things that you didn't think of. Like, it's wild to me. Just wild. The lack of imagination that Victor Frankenstein has about the benefits of iterative work. But whatever. It's fine. Made a whole guy is one way to describe Frankenstein. I guess so, yeah. Salty Pineapple says, no, but Joe is right. Victor was so insane for just going straight into making up a guy. Yeah, I know. It's not a good plan. This is one of those things too. Like, this is why people benefit from working as part of a community. Like, this guy was so isolated that there was nobody to be like, hey, bud. You know, it feels like you got a lot of good stuff going on here. You discover the alchemical ability to create life. That's good. That feels marketable. We could work with that. But, you know, I'm looking at this let's just go right into making an 8-foot tall dude part of the plan. And I'm feeling like maybe we don't do that yet. Maybe we build up to that or something, you know. Team effort. Like, maybe there's things we need to know about sourcing materials that we don't want to find out at the 8-foot tall guy scale. Maybe we find that out earlier. Yeah, overconfidence. It's like you learn how to create one type of life, and all of a sudden you think you're a god. Grace Winter says, maybe it's like computers. They get smaller as you get better. I think I joked about that last week, but no, he actually just says, like, he just wanted to do it that way. Like... Like, he just straight up says, like, I wanted my... It's that thing where somebody wants the first version of something to be perfect. He wants the proof of concept to be magnificent. He's somebody who doesn't believe in writing drafts. You know, and it's like, well, that'll get you so far. How are we feeling about this? I feel like that provides a good... It's interesting. It basically becomes the diorite texture zoomed out. I actually really like that. I'm going to leave that on screen for a minute so you guys can chime in. Let me zoom in at a few different scales. So, like, from here, it looks like that. But then as we go further out... Like, it's a good contrast against the surrounding, like, flat snow, ice, and stuff. But yeah, like, here's the thing, is let's say that Vicky F had gone in and said, okay, I'm going to make a kangaroo first. I've heard of them from Australia. I don't know a lot about them, but they sound great. I'm going to prove how amazing I am by making a kangaroo. Then let's say that kangaroo, seeking revenge, went and attacked that poor child. You know what the child's, the people who discovered the body would say? They would say, this child was out in the woods and was attacked by a crazy animal. They wouldn't say, oh, I bet Justine did it. So, like... But yeah, like, everything this guy does. Super amateur hour. Grace Winter says, is that why you built the nether version of all this first? To kind of... Yeah. It is partially. Because I wanted to see how long it would take. Placing every block in the nether version of this. I went and did a time lapse where I found all of the time that I actually spent placing blocks. I was like, how long does it take me to place blocks in a grid this size? Which was I believe, a 200 by 200 grid, because this is 8 times smaller than the overworld, and the overworld area is like 1600 by 1600. And this 200 by 200 grid took me 17 hours to place the blocks. Like, just placing the blocks, not gathering materials, nothing else. So now I know, so that gave me some information that I could use in the future about how long things took to place. It also gave me a sense of, like, where things are in relation to things. Like, this area over here, we put in these slabs, like, over a year ago. marking all these outbuildings. We're only getting to them now, but these have been here this whole time. You know? And so having a sense of, like, where that is in relation to the main area is, I think, really helpful. Sean says, I suggest adding some white terracotta in the palette for warmth for contrast. I don't want to do that. It's supposed to be a cold area. I want the cool snow to be the dominant temperature. And also, there's actually the warmth for contrast is going to be from the... Let's look at this in the distance here. There's actually already a lot of contrast in the skylight framing, the metalwork that houses the taller skylight ridges. So here we go. Let's land here. And where did I put those blocks? Oh, you know what? They aren't cached with the mod, it looks like. Boo. Yeah. This is the old version from the cache. Changing dimensions doesn't always update the cache. And I left via portal. Okay. So yeah, let's fly back over. But yeah, we've got some warmer colors in the palette all around here. But for the roof itself, I want it to feel like it's partially covered with snow. So we're leaning more into the snow blocks for that. Okay. Dun dun dun. Let's do a hard refresh. Sometimes the PayPal alerts haven't been going through. So we're going to do a hard refresh on PayPal before I update the tipping, or not the tipping link, before I update the what we're reading link. Do. Okay. Looks like we are all caught up indeed. Okay, so let's update our what we're reading link to chapter 9, because we're only an hour in, and I think we should have time to read chapter 9 tonight as well. Yeah, and I mean, to some degree, Robert Walton does the same thing. The first time he's ever chartered a ship to captain, he's scheduling a voyage to try and find the actual North Pole. It's not like, you know, I took this crew up and down the coast for a few weeks to make sure everything was, you know, ship shape. There's no real shakedown cruise. He's just like, okay, we're going to the North Pole, and, oh, hey, we found 2 guys. What's up with that? Huh? Weird. Like, this book is full of people who just kind of send it, I guess the kids would say. So, let's see, we need to repin that with the chapter 9 link. Unpin after end of stream. Pin message. Yep, there we go. Okay. So what do we want to try and do? I guess I can try to keep speckling this while we're over here. We've got some of each of the blocks. We're low on diorite. I'm not sure if we have more of that. Let's go check. Welcome, Lily Loves Cats too. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, 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 boom. Not doing great on the diorite front. Do we want to go dig up more diorite? In some ways, switching over to digging would keep things moving faster on the reading front. So yeah, let's see about dumping this back over here. Welcome, Lone Courier. Glad you could join us. So we've got white concrete, snow, and diorite, and we're going to toss this stuff into here. Lights, lights, lights. Do we really need a totem of undying in our offhand? Let's, just out of habit, keep it. Don't need necessarily that sword. Or that. We'll keep the second pickaxe. We'll grab rockets. Okay. And we'll grab another gift box for my Jevin. Smooth shovel. Okay. Then we'll go place some chests over there too whenever we get blocks. Okay, welcome, Jack. Okay. I think we are set up now for Chapter 9. Yeah, because we need to carve into this more fully. Oh boy, maybe I actually do want the... Oh gosh. Yeah, how much have we plotted this out? Not much. Yeah, maybe we do want the axe. Let's go grab some ender chests too. Okay. Okay, let's go put this over here. And we'll put another one over there. Padawan S says, I notice that Victor never seems to claim agency. He invokes fate to explain his decisions. Yeah, he definitely blames himself for a lot of it. But yeah, it's kind of a combination of... It's more that when he says it was like fated that things would come out this way, a lot of times he's like looking at the results of his actions. Like, he set the dominoes in motion. So he's blaming himself for starting chain reactions that he feels he's powerless to stop at this point. Okay. So I think at this point the stream is set up. Let's take down the setting up stream sign and let's start Chapter 9 of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley. Nothing is more painful to the human mind than, after the feelings have been worked up by a quick succession of events, the dead calmness of inaction and certainty which follows and deprives the soul both of hope and fear. Justine died. She rested. And I was alive. The blood flowed freely in my veins, but a weight of despair and remorse pressed on my heart, which nothing could remove. Sleep fled from my eyes. I wandered like an evil spirit, for I had committed deeds of mischief beyond description, horrible and more Much more, I persuaded myself, was yet behind. Yet, my heart overflowed with kindness and the love of virtue. I had begun life with benevolent intentions and thirsted for the moment when I should put them in practice and make myself useful to my fellow beings. Now, all was blasted. Instead of that serenity of conscience which allowed me to look back upon the past with self-satisfaction, and from thence to gather promise of new hopes, I was seized by remorse and the sense of guilt, which hurried me away to a hell of intense tortures, such as no language can describe. This state of mind preyed upon my health, which I had perhaps never entirely, or which had perhaps never recovered entirely from that first shock it sustained. I shunned the face of man. All sound of joy or complacency was torture to me. Solitude was my only consolation. Deep, dark, death-like solitude. My father observed with pain the alteration perceptible in my disposition and habits, and endeavored, by arguments deduced from the feelings of his serene conscience and guiltless life, to inspire me with fortitude and awaken in me the courage to dispel the dark cloud which brooded over me.
Do you think, Victor, that I do not suffer also? No one could love a child more than I loved your brother.
Tears came into his eyes as he spoke.
But is it not a duty to the survivors that we should refrain from augmenting their unhappiness by an appearance of immoderate grief? It is also a duty, O dear self, for excessive sorrow prevents improvement or enjoyment, or even the discharge of daily usefulness, without which no man is fit for society.
This advice, although good, was totally inapplicable in my case. I should have been the first to hide my grief and console my friends. If remorse had not mingled its bitterness and terror its alarm with my other sensations. Now I could only answer my father with a look of despair and endeavor to hide myself from his view. About this time, we retired to our house at Belle Rive. This change was particularly agreeable to me. The shutting of the gates regularly at 10 o'clock, and the impossibility of remaining on the lake after that hour, had rendered our residence within the walls of Geneva very irksome to me. I was now free. Often, after the rest of the family had retired for the night, I took the boat and passed many hours upon the water. Sometimes, with my sails set, I was carried by the wind. And sometimes, after rowing into the middle of the lake, I left the boat to pursue its own course and gave way to my own miserable reflections. I was often tempted, when all was at peace around me, and I the only unquiet thing that wandered restless in a scene so beautiful and heavenly, if I, except some bat, or the frogs, whose harsh and interrupted croaking was heard only when I approached the shore. Often, I say, I was tempted to plunge into the silent lake, that the waters might close over me and my calamities forever. But I was restrained when I thought of the heroic and suffering Elizabeth, whom I tenderly loved, and whose existence was bound up in mine. I thought also of my father and surviving brother. Should I, by my base desertion, leave them exposed and unprotected to the malice of the fiend whom I had let loose among them? At these moments, I wept bitterly and wished that peace would revisit my mind, only that I might afford them consolation and happiness. But that could not be. Remorse extinguished every hope. I had been the author of unalterable evils, and I lived in daily fear lest the monster whom I created should perpetrate some new wickedness. I had an obscure feeling that all was not over, and that he would still commit some signal crime which by its enormity should almost efface the recollection of the past. There was always scope for fear, so long as anything I loved remained behind. Or, so long as anything I loved remained behind. My abhorrence of this fiend cannot be conceived. When I thought of him, I gnashed my teeth. My eyes became inflamed, and I ardently wished to extinguish that life which I had so thoughtlessly bestowed. When I reflected on his crimes and malice, my hatred and revenge burst all bounds of moderation. I would have made a pilgrimage to the highest peak of the Andes, could I then there have precipitated him to their base. I wished to see him again, that I might wreak the utmost extent of abhorrence on his head, and avenge the deaths of William and Justine. Our house was the house of mourning. My father's health was deeply shaken by the horror of the recent events. Elizabeth was sad and desponding. She no longer took delight in her ordinary occupations. All pleasure seemed to her sacrilege toward the dead, eternal woe and tears. She then thought she was just tribute, and she should... All pleasure seemed to her sacrilege toward the dead. Eternal woe and tears, she then thought, was the just tribute she should pay to innocence so blasted and destroyed. She was no longer the happy creature who in earlier youth wandered with me on the banks of the lakes and talked with ecstasy of our future prospects. The first of those sorrows which are sent to wean us from the earth had visited her, and its dimming influence quenched her dearest smiles. When I reflect, my dear cousin, on the miserable death of Justine Moritz, I no longer see the world and its works as they before appeared to me. Before, I looked upon the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books or heard from others as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote and more familiar to reason than to the imagination. But now, misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters, thinking for each other's blood. Yet, I am certainly unjust. Everybody believed that poor girl to be guilty, and if she could have committed the crime for which she suffered, assuredly she would have been the most depraved of human creatures, for the sake of a few jewels, to have murdered the son of her benefactor and friend. A child whom she had nursed from its birth, and appeared to love as if it had been her own. I could not consent to the death of any human being, but certainly I should have thought such a creature unfit to remain in the society of men. But she was innocent. I know. I feel she was innocent. You are of the same opinion, and that confirms me. Alas, Victor, when falsehood can look so like the truth. Who can assure themselves of certain happiness? I feel as if I were walking on the edge of a precipice, towards which thousands are crowding and endeavoring to plunge me into the abyss. William and Justine were assassinated. The murderer escapes. He walks about the world free, perhaps respected. But even if I were condemned to suffer on the scaffold for the same crimes, I would not change places with such a wretch. I listened to this discord with extreme agony. I, not indeed, but in effect, was the true murderer. Elizabeth read my anguish in my countenance, and, kindly taking my hand, said, "My dearest friend, you must calm yourself. These events have affected me. God knows how deeply. But I am not so wretched as you are. There is an expression of despair, and sometimes of revenge, in your countenance that makes me tremble. Dear Victor, banish these dark passions. Remember the friends around you who center all their hopes in you. Have we lost the power of rendering you happy? Ah, while we love, while we are true to each other, here in this land of peace and beauty, your native country, may we reap every tranquil blessing. Who can disturb our peace?" Again, could not such words from her whom I fondly prized before every other gift of fortune suffice to chase away the fiend that lurked in my heart? Even as she spoke, I drew near to her, as if in terror, lest at that very moment the destroyer had been near to rob me of her. Thus, not the tenderness of friendship, nor the beauty of earth, nor of heaven, could redeem my soul from woe. The very accents of love were ineffectual. I was encompassed by a cloud which no beneficial influence could penetrate. The wounded deer, dragging its fainting limbs to some untrodden brake, there to gaze upon the arrow which had pierced it, and to die, was but a type of me. Sometimes I could cope with the sullen despair that overwhelmed me, but sometimes the whirlwind passions of my soul drove me to seek, by bodily exercise and by change of place, some relief from my intolerable sensations. It was during an access of this kind that I suddenly left my home, and, bending my steps toward the near alpine valleys, sought in the magnificence, the eternity of such scenes, to forget myself and my ephemeral, because human, sorrows. My wanderings were directed toward the valley of Chamounix. I had visited it frequently during my boyhood. 6 years had passed since then. I was a wreck, but naught had changed, in those savage and enduring scenes. I performed the first part of my journey on horseback. I afterwards hired a mule as the more sure-footed and least liable to receive injury on these rugged roads. The weather was fine, and it was about the middle of the month of August, nearly 2 months after the death of Justine, that miserable epoch from which I dated all my woe. The weight upon my spirit was sensibly lightened as I plunged yet deeper into the ravine of the Arve. The immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side, the sound of the river raging among the rocks and on the dashing of the waterfalls around, spoke of a power mighty as omnipotence, and I ceased to fear or bend before any being less almighty than that which had created and ruled the elements, here displayed in their most terrific guise. Still, as I ascended higher, the valley assumed a more magnificent and astonishing character. Ruined castles hanging on the precipices of piny mountains, the impetuous Arve, and cottages every here and there, peeping forth from among the trees, formed a scene of singular beauty. But it was augmented and rendered sublime by the almighty Alps, whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered above all, as belonging to another earth, the habitations of another race of beings. I passed the bridge of Pelissier, where the ravine which the river forms opened before me, and I began to ascend the mountain that overhangs it. Soon after, I entered the valley of Chameau Eunuchs. The valley is more wonderful and sublime, but not so beautiful and picturesque as that of Cerveau, through which I had just passed. The high and snowy mountains were its immediate boundaries, but I saw no more ruined castles and fertile fields. Immense glaciers approached the road. I heard the rumbling thunder of the falling avalanche and marked the smoke of its passage. Mont Blanc, the supreme and magnificent Mont Blanc, raised itself from the surrounding aiguilles, and tremendous dome overlooked the valley. A tingling, long-lost sense of pleasure often came to me during this journey. Some turn in the road, some new object, suddenly perceived and recognized, reminded me of days gone by, and were associated with the light-hearted gaiety of boyhood. The very winds whispered in soothing accents, and maternal nature bade me weep no more. Then again, the kindly influence ceased to act, and I found myself fettered again to grief and indulging in all the misery of reflection. Then I spurred on my animal, striving to forget the world, my fears, and more than all, myself, or, in a more desperate fashion, I alighted and threw myself on the grass, weighed down by horror and despair. At length, I arrived at the valley of Chameau Eunuchs. Exhaustion succeeded to the extreme fatigue, both of body and of mind, which I had endured. For a short space of time, I remained at the window, watching the pallid lightnings that played above Mont Blanc, and listening to the rushings of the Arve, which pursued its noisy way beneath. The same lulling sounds acted as a lullaby to my too keen sensations. When I placed my head upon the pillow, sleep crept over me. I felt as it came and blessed the giver of oblivion. And thus concludes Chapter 9 of Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. Jubali says, is this novel just starting? Last I checked, we were still doing Moby Dick. Jubali, we are on Chapter 10. We're starting Chapter 10 next week. We just finished Chapter 9. I am wiped out. It has been a long, busy few days leading up to preparing for this trip, and today it was just kind of one of those days where I kind of crashed, where I was just like, I need to save my energy for tomorrow's travel. So we're not going to keep the stream going too much longer. We are going to take some time and say thank you to anybody who has already tipped, but if you're watching this on the VOD, you can go ahead to the next episode now. Let's go ahead and post that tipping link one last time. We're going to stick around for about 10 minutes to give those tips a chance to roll in, because PayPal sometimes does take a little while to notify me, and I want to make sure everybody does get properly thanked. Speaking of tips, we have a few that came in during that chapter, so thank you very much to Natalie for tipping 5, who says, Frankenstein for Frankenstein. That gets us now 10 away from the next face camera expansion milestone. And Robin tips 10 and says, I think I got lost on the internet again. So thank you very much, Robin and Natalie, for that. That gets us evenly to our next face camera expansion milestone. Please direct your attention to my face, because we are about to expand Joe. Flower Child says, it's been nice to listen as you read. Nice to see you, Joe. Thank you, Flower Child. Appreciate you popping in. Anybody have any thoughts or concerns, questions? Bumblebee says, is he playing while reading, or is this one of them a recording? No, I'm playing while reading. That's why there's some weird pauses when I'm opening chests. It's way easier to dig or do certain tasks while reading than to, like, do inventory management and stuff. And speaking of inventory management, my inventory's full. Big surprise. Jemsk says, I'm over here drawing in a notebook while Joe reads Frankenstein. Feels like I'm back in English class. Well, as long as you're having fun. Hope your drawing is going well. Okay. Joseph Gaby also says, just drew a little thing with this in the background. Thank you for the stream. You're most welcome. Glad I can make things that people enjoy while they're getting stuff done. Let's go ahead and drop this coal ore over here. We've got like whole chests just for it. And then we've got doom boxes kind of for everything else. I should really move some of these doom boxes over there. We need to do a proper inventory sorting stream at some point. It just gets so out of hand so fast. You know, it's such a huge time sink to build a big inventory system. This season it didn't make any sense because I was going to be traveling all over this area. But next time I have an area that's not quite so large, I'm going to probably do this a little differently in the future. Let's see, how do we want to approach this? These trees and stuff I was going to maybe leave for now. Oh, we do need to get... that bit coming in. Okay. Yeah, we have plenty of digging to do over here still, too. I guess if I'm not reading anymore, we don't need to keep digging because I can go work on actual stuff for the build when I have my concentration. I was hoping when we were digging, though, we would find diorite veins. That was one of the reasons I was like, oh, let's go dig because we're short on diorite. But unfortunately, we are not having any luck with the diorite here. I don't think I picked up any. No. Literally none. It's the Apollo 13 says, sometimes it's hard to keep up with the story because of the old-time wording. Is Vicky meant to be an unreliable narrator? It's kind of, but, like, not in a way where you can't trust that he's trying to do a good job. They used intentionally unreliable whisper down the alley narration. The idea that this is Frankenstein's story recounted to a guy who is himself clearly crazy, who's trying to find the North Pole. The reason that they set it up that way, or I say they, Shelley and other contemporary authors, a lot of times writing stories that were more fantastic like this, they would set them up as like hearsay to allow the reader, who was not going to be genre savvy because these genres were not established yet. The sort of hearsay setup and bookending here allows the non-genre savvy reader to suspend disbelief. You know, a lot of people who might not be familiar with science fiction as a genre because Mary Shelley hadn't invented it yet. I mean, she wasn't the only person developing science fiction as a genre, but this is one of the first, like, modern science fiction books, right? People didn't know what to expect from a story like this, right? The idea of framing the narrator as somebody who might be a madman, telling it to somebody else who might be reliable or might be unreliable or misremembering it, allows them to reach an audience that might otherwise be like, this is too silly. I can't. What are we doing? What are we even doing here, right? You know? It's that sort of thing. So he's not unreliable for the purposes that you care about, but he's unreliable for the purposes that Shelley cared about, which was not alienating her audience immediately with how fantastic this is. Okay. Okay, I think, let's see. A few other things we need to go over before we wrap up this stream. Just as a reminder, I know this wasn't the normal time for the Saturday night reading stream on account of it being Thursday. But at this point, what I'm trying to do is anytime I have to miss a Saturday, instead of just skipping that week, I'm moving the reading stream earlier in the day or in the week, because I would rather make sure that the story keeps moving at a predictable pace than that we stick to the absolute schedule, especially since this is the only stream that's guaranteed a VOD every week. This way people are guaranteed at least one VOD a week, rather than guaranteed, okay, you won't ever miss it live if you're always available on Saturday, because I can't promise I'm always going to be available on Saturday. And so we're just going to keep this party going whenever we can. You will always be able to find my next stream on the schedule at joehills.net/soon. Okay, I think it's been, has it been about 10 minutes? Not quite yet. But yeah, like I said, we're giving 10 minutes for any last-minute PayPal tips to roll in. We are currently 20 away from the next face camera expansion milestone. Bum, bum, bum. I am hoping to do a morning stream tomorrow, just to kind of ensure I sanity check everything before I go. But it'll only be a 1-hour coffee stream. It'll be a short coffee stream just to hang out briefly before I head off. Okay. But I've basically got all my laundry done and packed everything that I need to pack. I've got my passport because I think real IDs are stupid. You know, I haven't really gone back and checked this since. But when these were initially proposed, I was told that they were introduced to penalize Tennessee because the federal government didn't like how we had set up our state's driver's license system. And so a lot of Tennesseans at the time were super mad, and a lot of Tennesseans still have refused to get real IDs. And I don't know how true it was. Maybe they weren't just singling us out. Maybe they were mad at a lot of states, but you know what? I got a passport. I'm fine. I'm not gonna go sit in the DMV to meet some stupid federal requirement. Okay. So how are we doing on everything here? We got 2 almost broken picks, a broken shovel. Of course, the one thing that I'm actually trying to pick up, the diorite, we're just leaving on the ground. So at least we found some diorite here. That'll help us with our roof. So let's grab the rest of this diorite before we wrap up. Yeah, and it's not like the federal government is like, well, fine, we're going to take over the driver's license issuing offices. It's like, no, we're going to tell you guys how to do your jobs. It's like, if you don't want to do the work, back off. But yeah, in particular, the Real ID thing was introduced shortly after Tennessee had decided that they would start allowing illegal immigrants to take the driver's license test and get driver's licenses because it was more important to make sure that the people driving farm equipment down the road actually, you know, knew our local laws than to... you know, like, chase them away. And federal government didn't like that. They're like, you guys aren't being mean enough to outsiders. You need to be meaner. I don't like being told to be meaner. Once again, you know, I'm not sure how much of that ended up mattering when the Real ID stuff was actually finally passed. This is just what people were talking about in Tennessee when it was first introduced years and years and years ago, because this has been postponed so many times. But yeah, it was definitely viewed as a hostile act and an overreach at the time, and nobody I've talked to here is really happy about it now either. Okay, let's toss these. Okay, so what do we got here? Diorite. We got the diorite we need. That's something at least. Okay, let's wrap up the stream. I'm ready to go. Lay my head down and dream in game, but also probably in real life too. Let's see. Let's see. It looks like the Yegpin Match Play Championship is occurring. So we're going to mute site and set up to raid Tom over at Fox Cities Pinball. Looks like this event is being held at... That might be District 82? No, Yegpin is... It's got a similar roof or inside ceiling to District 82, but that can't be District 82. That's got to be something else. I'm not sure where Yegpin is. It might be in Edmonton. It's in Alberta, Canada. Oh, it says so on the stream. So yeah, we're gonna raid them. Tom has brought his gear up to Canada and is streaming there. When you get over there, our raid message is howdy y'all, Joe Hill's raid here. What game are they currently playing? Is that Demolition Man? Oh yeah, they're playing Demolition Man. That's always a fun one. So thank you all so much for hanging out. Hope you enjoyed the reading. Until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville,